Good evening, everyone. And as chair of the Rabanal Committee, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to this virtual gathering to celebrate the 30 years of Refugio Gaucelmo in Rabanal. As I say, I am the current chair, but I'm very well aware when I look at the faces on the screen tonight that my pedigree in the Camino and indeed in Rabanal is nothing like as long as some of the people here tonight, or most of the people here tonight. I just happen to be the current chair, but it is a great privilege to welcome you. And we are here today, of course, thanks to the vision of CSJ members back in the 1980s who set up Refugio Gaucelmo, and also to the dedication of committee members over the years, and to the hard work of the volunteers who go out to Spain to work. And also, of course, to the outstanding generosity of the sponsors from all over the world. And they really are from all parts of the world. And although I have to share with you just one little occurrence 2 years ago when I was the last time I was in Rabanal, and we were there for a working party and closing the place up. And the last couple of hospitaleros had dutifully written their nice letters to the sponsors for that last 2 weeks. And the sponsors' letters were in their envelopes sitting on the table. And the girl said to me, "Oh, you're going into Astorga, aren't you? Would you mind posting these letters, you know, the thank you letters to the sponsors?" And I looked at the top envelope and I said, no, I'm not going to post that in Astorga. I'm going to take it with me, because this letter was addressed to somebody who lives in my village in Herefordshire, somebody who I sort of knew but had no idea was connected with Rabanal. And I mean, I could bore you all evening with stories of coincidences like this, but as I say, thanks to all those sponsors. We also rely on the support and friendship of our partners in Spain, the Amigos del Bierzo, and the wonderful villagers of Rabanal, and our friends next door in the monastery. We have had, as you're well aware, a couple of very difficult years, but the ability to meet like this over Zoom has proved invaluable. And in spite of the albergue being closed, the committee has been amazingly busy over these last 19 months. And in fact, we've had twice as many meetings as we would do if we were traveling to London, meetings via Zoom. And of course, that also means we have no traveling expenses in getting to London. At our last, as it were, in the flesh event, which was the preparation day for the Hospitaleros at the beginning of 2020, and this was in London. And when I remember going up to London, and there were a few masks being worn on the tube, and about on that day, about 20 confirmed cases of COVID in Spain. But even then, we did warn the hospitaleros who were there that they may not be travelling out to Spain that season. And look what happened. Because within a fortnight of that occasion, I found myself shouting at the Prime Minister on the television screen and writing to my MP, which I don't make a habit of, urging, you know, some sort of action. But tonight we're going to look back at some happier times, and we're also looking forward to happier times, and are planning indeed to open next April. And on the latest figures, Spain is doing a lot better than we are on COVID, so fingers crossed. This last week in the media, I'm sure you haven't missed it, following the awful murder of Sir David Amess and the discussion of the general level of abuse that a lot of public-facing figures have had to endure online. From various quarters, there's been a plea for more kindness in our society. And I know that our albergue on the Camino gives us a wonderful opportunity for all those involved in the running of the albergue to show that kind of kindness in a very practical way to pilgrims from all over the world. And indeed, it's the only reason you're all here tonight. So thank you for coming and sharing in this celebration. I now hand over to Sue, who with Julie and Paul, and of course Freddie in the office, have helped put together tonight's event. So thank you.
Now, the volume on this presentation varies in level, so I will adjust my volume as best I can, but just a heads up that you might want to do the same also on your devices if needed. So here we are, starting slide. I'll allow you a few seconds through that.
I walked to Santiago in 1986. In those days, the Camino was very different than it is now. There were probably only about a third of the number of refugios between Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and Santiago. And the impression, going through that very arid part where Rabanal is situated, was one of total desolation. In Rabanal itself, it was possible to sleep in the abandoned schoolhouse, but most walkers simply skipped the 50-kilometer section between Astorga and Ponferrada and took the train. I thought that to you what things were like, I'd simply read from the book that I wrote when I came home, which was called A Hug for the Apostle. This was what the approach to Rabanal was like. As the road climbed, the terrain took on a new harshness. Grass verges were gradually replaced by desiccated banks of earth, sprouting a profusion of heathers of all shades. Rocks littered the surface of the thin soil. In the 12 dusty kilometers after Santa Catalina, there was only one village, El Ganso, windswept and derelict. We reached Rabanal in mid-afternoon. 4 people were sitting in the shade of a veranda, facing a treeless square as we called out for directions to the Bar Chonina. This was the Bar Chonina, and this, one of the women indicated a tanned and smiling companion, was Chonina herself. The bar, we learned, had closed in January. I had secretly hoped that the bar would save us from a night in the abandoned schoolhouse. I looked around at the poverty of the village, and the hope died unspoken. El Edificio Escolar stood across the square, windowless and listing crazily. Later, we picked our way across the square in the dark, sheltering a lighted candle stuck in a broken brick. Inside the schoolhouse, the floorboards had sprung free of their nails, and the roof sagged. The place was filthy, thick with dust and the droppings of birds and bats. Now that experience was rather different from the pilgrim's experience of Rabanal today. And with that, I'll hand over to William Griffiths, a former chair of the CSJ, reading the words of Walter Ivans, who is rightly credited as the inspiration for our project.
It was a lovely day and we were bicycling. We had left Astorga at about 9 o'clock and we arrived in Rabanal at about 11. In fact, we had stopped in front of Chonina's bar, although it was closed. This was late June, so it was about a month after Laurie's trip. We pushed the bicycles to the church. little did I realize that we were virtually opposite what was to become the refuge. While resting by the church, I walked down the actual pilgrim road and met up with an old lady sitting on her doorstep. I said, "Is there any hope of buying some drink or some food?" She answered, "Hijo mío, no hay nada. My son, there is nothing." I felt terribly chuffed by the idea of being called my son. I was 58 years old and took it as a very great honor. We then bicycled on, and my memory of Rabanal was of that old lady sitting on her doorstep. That evening, after 2 or 3 glasses of red wine, I wrote in my diary, "After Rabanal, one passes Fontebadon and El Acebo, and all 3 are pretty empty and derelict villages. Seeing all these derelict villages, houses tumbling down, probably still lived in but nobody about, gave me a sense of guilt. Because we supposed pilgrims pass by on one side with shame and an itch to take a photo, to show off to others on the primitiveness of the Camino. As modern pilgrims, we take the route, but I don't think we give back much. Yes, we spend money in hotels and bars, but these little places have nothing to offer, and they can't make a profit on nothing. Well, a year or so later, the confraternity was celebrating its 5th anniversary and wanted to find a future purpose for itself and asked for proposals. So in my proposal, I quoted that text, and then I went on to say, I would like to suggest that a purpose for the confraternity would be to help in reviving one of these villages. We could help to convert, with care, some of the old houses into a pilgrim's hostel, like the amenities and atmosphere at Oceberero, but also with a shop to buy provisions. Hopefully, the endeavor would attract more commerce, tourism, and the village will come to life. Question: why should the confraternity be involved? And isn't the project too big? Answer: because we would be contributing a tangible benefit to the pilgrimage route in the form of a hostel in one of the roughest, most beautiful and needy parts of the Camino, a link between the past and the future. By providing the necessary services for the hostel, like water, electricity, sewerage, the opportunity opens for others to settle in the village, and so it provides a major step in bringing the village back to life. Such a purpose would have a great appeal, and by publicizing the appeal, it would widen knowledge of the confraternity and increase membership. The concept is big and would take years to achieve, but considering it bit by bit on a long time scale, I believe it is within the potential of the confraternity, provided it is really considered worthwhile. And that was the start. I will now hand over to Michael Cryer, an experienced hospitalero and current member of the CSJ Rabanal Committee, to read the words of James Maple, who in 1988 was chairman of the confraternity.
In the spring of 1988, the Confraternity Committee decided to ask for suggestions. Any organisation that's going to thrive needs good ideas from its people. The original group of people who started the confraternity had a brilliant idea, and they really saw it through. The idea was to do something for those villages that were lacking nearly everything in Spain, and give back something that we had all received from the pilgrimage. We were delighted with Walter's idea, but as with all ideas, somebody has to do something about it. What we did was to write to the Federation of the Spanish Associations of Amigos del Camino, who were our opposite numbers in Spain. We gave them an outline of our ideas for a refugio of some sort, but we left it to them to tell us where. Now that letter was written in the spring, and in the summer we had still heard nothing. But in October we heard that something was happening, and in February 1989 we had a letter from Alberto Moran, who was priest in Molina and secretary of the Amigos del Bierzo. He wrote with the news that the Bishop of Astorga had ceded the parish house in Rabanal to his association and to ours to make it into a refugio. The building was apparently very nearly a complete ruin, and he hoped that we could restore it in some way. The main committee approved the whole idea, but it was a smaller committee, the Rabanal committee, that got it all going.
When we heard from Alberto Moran in February 1989, we arranged to make an exploratory visit. The first three of us to go were Walter Ivans, Paul Graham, and myself, and we went in March for a long weekend. We flew out and got ourselves to Ponferrada, where we met for the first time our colleagues of the Amigos del Camino de El Bierzo. These people were 4 in number. Don Luis Bacariza, who was a doctor, very well known in the area since he'd looked after Rabanal, and he was at that time president of the Amigos. Secondly, Don Alberto Moran, who made us immediately feel at home. There were 2 others, one called Paco, who seemed to be the treasurer, and one called Eulogio, whom we came to call El Greco. He was a metal worker, and by the way, it was he who made that wonderful monument to the German pilgrim who was killed on his bicycle in El Acebo. We had supper with them on the Friday evening, and on the Saturday morning, they introduced us to Rogelio Valcarce, who was the builder or contratista, and then took us to see 3 other houses which Rogelio had restored. They were all very beautiful, like chalets, and we were duly impressed. We were treated to this before being taken to see the ruin in Rabanal. I think they were trying to buffer us against the shock, and it was quite a shock. The building was in an unbelievable state. The entire interior had collapsed, and there was a hole in the front wall that you could have driven a bus through. But even though it was derelict, the place had a certain something. And so Paul, Walter, and I returned to our hotel after another convivial dinner with the Amigos and sat up half the night, deciding whether we ought to involve the confraternity in this or run a mile, because the commitment was for 10 million pesetas, which was at that time about £50,000. It seemed an incredible thing to be embarking on. But in the end, we decided that yes, there was something here with the CSJ's name on it, and it was just something we were called to do. So we came away fully convinced that it was our Camino, so to speak. We made another flying visit a few months later. I always laugh and say that the roof saved us 500,000 pesetas by collapsing altogether at some point between the two visits, so that we didn't have to go to the expense of hiring a crane to take it down. There was a great beam which just snapped, and we may have been taking a risk on that first visit by walking around under it. Now I'll hand over to Catherine Davies, a current Gaucelmo Hospitalera and a trustee of the CSJ, reading the words of Mary Ivans.
I'm going to say something about fundraising. I know it's a slightly dull subject, but I'll try and make it as light as I can. Fundraising is a daunting task at the best of times, as I'm sure you all know. To try and raise money to build a pilgrim's hostel in northern Spain was a huge challenge. When you mention the idea to anyone, you either receive a glazed look, where's that, on the Costa? Or else a gleam of interest and Santiago to what? So in September 1989, we produced a leaflet and called it, "Where are all these people going?" And we also produced a mug to match. Our honorary president, the Spanish ambassador, agreed to help us launch the campaign in November 1989 with a party at the Spanish embassy. A symbolic check of hope, but no money, was ceremonially handed over, and James Hatz, aged 8, dressed as a pilgrim, presented the cheque to Father Alberto Moran in front of the party. Now, membership at that time was 500, and we needed £50,000, which meant £100 from each member really wasn't realistic. But an early success was an offer from the Bernard Sunley Foundation of £2,500 every time we reached a £10,000 mark. Members and friends gave generously over the years, with sums that went from £1 to hundreds, and various other charities contributed, and some of the European associations made donations. But of course, we had to devise ways of raising money. Fenella Henderson, a CSJ member, raised £800 by doing a sponsored parachute jump, which frightened the life out of us. Another member, as Ted Dickinson, did gardening locally, and every penny he earned went to the appeal and gained much publicity. Because in those days, there was little interest in the Camino, and the media hadn't yet discovered it, so there was no TV, no films, no books. Adrian Wright ran a sponsored London Marathon in 1990, and our founder member, Mary Remnant, gave lecture recitals with her marvellous collection of medieval instruments. In May of the same year, Paul Graham, supported by various CSJ members, took his famous penny farthing bicycle to Bath, where he had the idea of riding it up and down with a tin of money clipped on the handlebars in the square in front of the Abbey. We collected the princely sum of £14 and 1 button. Not all our efforts were successful, but we really did enjoy ourselves. The next year, a weekend in Norfolk was organised where a member's friend built a miniature railway, and the money that was charged for the rides went into the appeal. But not all the fundraising was tough going. We had a wine tasting evening organised by Paul, and it was incredibly well attended by members. But by the time we'd reached the last 2 bottles, I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember the pedigree of the wine, where it came from, its flavour and its colour. but we enjoyed ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to make clear about fundraising. It may seem a dreary subject, but we had an enormous amount of fun. And we hit the £50,000 target in under 2 years. And today the figure raised is around 110,000. In 1988, I found a sculptor to make a small statue of St James for Walter's 60th birthday. His name was Beaufort Linley, and he lived in a small cottage just to the south of Grantham with his wife and an enormous wolfhound with numerous cats and a goat in the back garden. Now, when a generous benefactor donated a sum for a statue to be made in memory of Father Elias Baligna, the priest of Osobrero who had just died, Beaufort set to in the piggeries on his small holding to carve a metre-high St James in white Ancaster stone. Today, that statue is in a niche on the front of Refugio Gaucelmo, watching the pilgrims come and go through Rabanal and in and out of the Refugio. I'll now hand over to Dick Crean, who is a former hospitalero and former chair of the CSJ Rabanal Committee. And along with his wife Liz, he was central to the organisation and success of the 25th anniversary event in Rabanal. He will read the words of Joe May.
I was with Walter and Mary when we picked up the statue, and I promised Beaufort that I would see it placed in position myself. We then put it in the back of the van and proceeded to Rabanal. One of the minor snags was that none of us knew whether it was legal to take works of art out of the country without saying something to somebody, and we certainly didn't know whether it was legal to import works of art into Spain, again, without saying something to somebody. We decided to ignore it. We wrapped St James up quite comfortably in some sleeping bags, and the party decided that I should be the driver since I had the most honest face. What they really meant was that I was the most plausible rogue. One thing about that statue that we should all remember is that it is there in memory of Elias Baligna, the parish priest of Osobrero, the great scholar of the Camino, and the man who marked it with yellow arrows to give the whole idea of the pilgrimage a lift and a sense of direction. The positioning of the statue was quite interesting because there were a couple of stainless steel rods sticking out at the bottom. Those stainless steel rods had to be fitted into holes in the niche, and I drilled the holes. The day came when it was all going to happen. The builders had brought a crane and the whole of the square was filled with everybody from the village. The slightly daunting thing from my point of view was that every one of them knew as absolute fact that the statue wouldn't fit into that niche. Well, eventually we did get it in, and my friend Jesus, one of the villagers, helped me. He put in the waterproof cement at the bottom and sealed it all, and I've inspected it every year with a couple of exceptions since it was installed, and the ceiling hasn't changed one jot or tittle in all that time. The statue may well be unique because it's the only statue of St James, as far as I know, that was erected by Joseph and Jesus.
Le das un poquitín para atrás. Después lo llevamos nosotros aquí. Y arranca. Amigos, se puede ir
The very first of the working parties was almost a site clearing job, brutally hard work, and not all the members of the party were used to sustain manual labour. Once again, our friend Alberto Moran saved our bacon because his parents' house in Molina Seca was vacant, so he offered it to us, and so we worked in the daytime on the Refugio, and then we drove over the hills to Molina Seca and stayed in the house. During that first working party, we had our first pair of pilgrims. They were a Scots couple, and we were up to our eyes in dust and dirt when the pair walked in. They walked straight up to me and said, "What can we do to help?" And if that doesn't epitomise the spirit of the Camino, I don't know what does. I promptly gave them each a broom and said, "Go upstairs and clear the floor." And that was how the floor of the dormitory was cleared. After their labours of the day, we said, "Well, we'll make you up a bed," which we did in one of the small rooms. We had a large number of polystyrene insulation sheets, which we piled up, and then we said, "There you are, get on with that. That's the best insulated and warmest bed in Spain." I've never forgotten those two, and their very first words, "What can we do to help?" It was a wonderful thing. The thing about all working parties is that everyone brought along a skill, and all the work was undertaken in the same spirit of giving something back to the Camino, and it worked exceedingly well.
I am no carpenter, and I'm not an electrician, and not that much use with the paintbrush. But one of the main things about a working party week is that you have to keep warm. These working parties are at the end of March, and as you all know, at the end of March there's still snow around, and sometimes when we went there was snow in Rabanal. I remember the first time I realised just how cold it was, and that was when I was trotting along the bathroom with my sponge bag, pyjamas and a dressing gown, and then finding everything thick with snow. Another time we had the most fantastic weather, and we were worrying about people's sunburnt noses or trying to find old straw hats because it was just so incredibly hot. You never knew what the weather was going to be like, and you just had to be prepared for everything. I found myself in the position of housekeeper, really, because everyone started work after breakfast at about 8:30 or so, and they worked jolly hard. And by the time they got to the Spanish time for lunch at about 2 o'clock, everyone was just extremely hungry. And one of the things that somebody in the working party has to do is to go into Astorga and buy provisions. In the evenings, they went alternately to Antonio's and Chanina's for a hot supper, but lunch and breakfast had to be bought. And Tuesday is market day in Astorga, and it was enormous fun to return with lots of things in the back of the car, not quite sure what some of them were. For quite a time, I was involved in organising the Warden's Rota. Wardens from all over the world, from the United States, from Norway, Holland, Belgium, Switzerland and the UK. You name it, they came. They came at their own expense, and they worked exceedingly hard, and still do, to make the pilgrims comfortable. Etienne and Nellie, who were the first wardens, and David Wesson, who succeeded them and was subsequently quite frequently a warden, set the pattern in many ways, and in those very early days did something that was crucial to the development and the character of Rabanal. We'd already decided that pilgrims could stay on a donativo basis, but these wardens added to that idea that they were to be sent off in the morning with breakfast, and that too would be free. We would leave it up to them to put into the donations box whatever they thought was appropriate. It's been an immense success. I've seen people standing by the donations box, just stuffing notes in sheer gratitude for the way they've been looked after, and for the special magic that Refugio Gaucelmo bestows on pilgrims. It's the wardens that we should thank, because they have kept the breakfasts going all these years. I'll now pass over to Paul Graham.
Refugio Gaucelmo opened officially on the 1st of April 1992, but the opening ceremony took place on the 25th of October 1991. At the ceremony there were quite a few CSJ members. There were pilgrims, the villagers, and the Maragatos dancers. It was quite simply an expression of how faith in the project had in fact triumphed at that stage. Some seasoned fundraisers had predicted that we might raise £2,000 or £3,000 altogether towards our £50,000. And eventually we were very glad to have raised over £100,000. The inauguration Mass, celebrated by the Bishop of Astorga, was an international gathering, as was the entire day. People from the British Embassy in Madrid came, and many friends from other organisations to do with the Camino. And it was appropriate that it should be an international meeting, because this was not an English Refugio, it was an international Refugio, and was celebrated as such. Now, with a perspective from the CSJ's London office, I hand you over to Sue Hemmings reading the words of Marion Marples, a long-time secretary of the CSJ.
Meanwhile, in England, there were two patterns of activity. There was the work going on in Spain, liaising with the El Bierzo Association and the builders and organising the wardens, while all the time at home, and I was one of those who was very much at home, there was the fundraising, about which Mary has told you some of the highlights. One of the regular features was a typewritten A4 leaflet, Rabanal News, which came out with every bulletin, encouraging people to continue their efforts and share ideas, listing donors on the back, and challenging people to more and more ingenious ways in which they could raise money. It soon became apparent that our number one ideas man was none other than Paul Graham. One of Paul's brilliant ideas was sponsor a week. People who couldn't go parachuting, or who didn't do gardening, or who couldn't go to Rabanal would still like to be involved, and the year could be divided up into weeks, and people could pick a week of their birthday, wedding anniversary or whatever, and choose to sponsor that week. In return, they would receive a letter from the warden detailing what had been happening in the refuge that week. I know that all the people who have participated in this scheme have really valued the contact, the continuing contact, often on an annual basis now. Initially, it was for 1 year, but it has been continuing ever since, and it provides a really very useful source of money, a regular income, and has provided much pleasure for those who have taken part. Rabanal also received many donations in kind. It's almost got to the stage now where one rather worries about people, members of the confraternity, dying. Because there is some form of bequest, something else to be put up in Rabanal, and we don't want it to become a mausoleum. Some of the early gifts, however, were very welcome and very appreciated. The big table and benches in the salon were given in memory of a member who died. So it's all been important for building up the furnishings and the comfort of the refuge. The final big donation, which is very much appreciated, was the icon of Santiago Peregrino, which was blessed in 2001 at the 10th anniversary, in memory of Stephen Badger, who was treasurer of the confraternity, was very influential in fundraising.
In December 1996, a very wonderful thing occurred. The 5th anniversary of the official opening of Refugio Gaucelmo had just passed in late October, and in December, the confraternity was the first recipient of an honour called the Premio Elias Valiña. Father Elias Valiña of Osobrero was the person who brought the Camino to life in modern times. He was a great scholar, but he was also exceedingly practical. He tried his best to create facilities for pilgrims that were not only dignified, but which would foster the spirit of the Camino by encouraging people from different countries to get together, get to know one another, talk together beside the log fire in Osobrero, and so on. When he died in 1989, it was hard to decide how best to honor and commemorate him. Some of his friends who had been appointed to the Xunta de Galicia's Committee of Experts persuaded the Xunta to institute the Premio Elias Valiña. It was to be awarded to the association or the individual whose activities on behalf of pilgrims best expressed the spirit of the Camino. It was a tremendous joy and honor for the confraternity to win it for Refugio Gaucelmo in the very first year it was awarded. And very fortunately, we have some footage from the Galician television coverage of that event. I was in Santiago then and accepted the award on behalf of the confraternity.
A Confraternity of St. James de Londres, representada pola súa presidenta Laurie Dennett, foi a asociación xacobea gañadora da primeira edición do Premio Elias Valiña, creado pola Consellería de Cultura para recoñecer o traballo das entidades que destaquen no esforzo de promocionar e revitalizar o Camiño de Santiago. Aquí a obra pola que a Confraternity of St. James se fixo acreedora deste galardón Elias Valiña. Trátase do albergue Gaucelmo situado nunha praciña contigua á igrexa de Rabanal do Camiño nos confíns da Maragatería leonesa, unha poboación atravesada polo camiño e de grande tradición xacobea. Este albergue reconstruído sobre a bella casa rectoral e inaugurado hai agora 5 anos é obra da Confraternity of St. James, unha obra realmente importante e digna de encomio neste importante fito do Camiño.
I think one of the most beautiful things about Refugio Gaucelmo is that the example of it has inspired the associations of other countries. The Italians were very shortly behind us in restoring the ruins of San Nicolas at Puente Viterbo. An individual Swiss donor endowed the albergue at Ponferrada. The Germans established one small refuge at Azofra and another 2 in Hospital de Órbigo and Fontebadón, and a German cultural association created another in La Faba. All of them have cited the example of the confraternity in doing what they have done.
In 1997, a community of 3 Benedictine monks moved into the house next door that used to belong to Astorga Oriel and Charo Carrion, who had moved to Seville. They sing the Divine Office in church every day, and they are very popular with all the pilgrims, and they have added to the attraction of Rabanal as a staging post for those on the Camino. Another of our fundraising efforts was the Tower Appeal. None of what we have tried to do would have succeeded without the help of the villagers, so we wanted to try and find a way of saying thank you to them. We happened upon the idea that the belfry of the tower needed renovation, or in fact replacement. We went to the bishop and said to him, "We will contribute £10,000 towards the renovation of the belfry." He said, "Thank you very much." And so we set about another appeal. This meant another leaflet and more effort, but astonishingly we managed to raise £10,000 in precisely 3 months. In October 1999, the bishop came back and inaugurated and blessed the tower, and there was yet another party.
the end of 1999, several of those I call the pioneers of the project, whose words you have heard this evening, retired from the Refugio Gaucelmo committee. So Walter and Mary Ivans, Joe May, and James Maple stood down, along with that other great pioneer, Pat Quaife. Since then, the work of the CSJ Rabanal Committee has continued. Its membership changes, yet the work of supporting and sustaining the refuge continues. Together with our colleagues in the Association of El Bierzo, the monks from the monastery next door, and the people of Rabanal. The Camino Francés has grown in popularity, and the village has been brought back to life, with former residents returning and hostels, shops, bars and campsites opening. So Walter's dream at the very beginning has been realized. In October 2001, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the inauguration, and many CSJ members came on a visit. William Griffiths, in his pilgrim hat and cloak, captivated a group of school children intrigued by the whole pilgrim phenomenon. The villagers were there, the musicians played, and the dancers performed their wonderful traditional dances. Members of others associations attended. The bishop celebrated Mass, and again we had a party in the Huerta, a pattern which, as Paul Murray mentioned earlier, was repeated when celebrations were held for our 25th anniversary in 2016.
It is a privilege to be invited to say a few words about Refugio Gaucelmo, a place I hold dear in my heart, as I do the village of Rabanal del Camino and its inhabitants. For me, it is no exaggeration to say it is el paraíso en la tierra, paradise on earth.
This is a picture, we've heard a lot of names tonight, and Alberto Moran is holding a microphone to Walter Ivans, who's one of the founding members of the whole setup for Gaucelmo. We've heard a lot from Walter tonight. So this is the opening ceremony back 30 years ago tonight. And you've got Antolin, the rather tall man with glasses on the left-hand side, two away from the bishop, and Antolin is the present rector of the Basilica of La Encina in Ponferrada. I'm not sure
it's our Christmas moment, Paul. There we go. Next slide.
Right. So we have
CS.
Shall I play this one?
Yeah.
No, Paul, you go.
My involvement with the CSJ began in 1997, when I attended a practical pilgrim day in Warwick here in England. I subsequently joined the Rabanal Committee and assisted Dick and Liz Crean in their organising of the 25th anniversary celebration held in Rabanal over the weekend of the 8th, 9th and 10th of July 2016. The year before, Liz and I began interviewing some of the locals in the village, and the result was a souvenir bilingual booklet, which I edited and which also featured some stories from previous editions of the CSJ's Bulletin magazine. It was very satisfying to get to know the locals better and bringing past events that affected both communities to life. A number of the members of the CSJ who had been involved with the transformation of the rectory into the pilgrim hostel made the visit to Spain to be reunited with several of the locals who were also enthusiastic participants. A press conference al fresco on the Friday in Ponferrada included Antolin de Cela, the rector of Ponferrada Basilica, who had stood beside the bishop at the opening ceremony. Also there was Laurie Dennett, another key player in the creation of Gaucelmo. In the photo is also the current chair of the Amigos, Roger de la Cruz. There was extensive local television, radio, and online newspaper coverage, and it felt most rewarding to publicize the book to the media. To this day, locals still approach our hospitaleros for copies. That evening, the staff at Antonio Perez El Mesón, across the square from Gaucelmo, served a delicious meal in their large downstairs dining room, and were delighted to accept the rapturous applause from the diners, who included Javier, Pius, and Clemens from the Outreach Benedictine monastery in the village. Two special guests were Charo and Sunta, two Spanish ladies and former residents of the village, who offered a constant support to the early working parties from the UK.
So here we have the procession with the Maragato dancers. No celebration in Rabanal.
No celebration in Rabanal is complete without Maragato dancers and musicians. And the next day they led a parade to Santa Maria Church.
Yeah.
The concelebrated Mass in Santa Maria mirrored the service in the same church celebrating the inauguration of the hostel back in 1991. This time the main celebrant was Abbot Jeremias from the mother monastery of St. Ottilien in Germany. In his homily, he likened the hospitality offered to Jesus by Martha, Mary, and Lazarus in their home to that offered by Gaucelmo's selfless hospitaleros. Isabel Moran, whose family have run Albergue El Pilar since 1996, along with Dick Crean, led the bidding prayers in Spanish and English.
Oh, looks like I'll have to speak here.
It does. I was just pausing in case, but no, off you go.
Just in case. Yes, it was a really hot day, as you can see there. So everybody was fighting for the shade. So when we paraded into the Huerta, into the wonderful garden that Gaucelmo has, Maxi and Genaro led the procession. What I love is just on the left-hand side, you can see on the clothesline a bag of pegs that had been left for the pilgrims to hang the clothes up to dry. Yes, the celebrations got underway. And are we going on to the next one?
Yeah, hopefully.
Maxi and Genaro, the tamborite.
There we are.
Oh, yes, here's a very special gentleman standing on a chair because he's quite small, Jose Antonio, but boy, can he write poetry. Now, he didn't recite all 122 verses of his epic poem about Rabanal, just read a few extracts from them, but another one of the roles that he plays
organised a walk round the village the next morning for those up early enough. Sunday Mass was celebrated by the new Bishop of Astorga, and the Queens organised a walk round the village the next.
Yes, I was just going to say that Jose Antonio is he's also the man that's responsible for repairing the bells in the clock tower of Santa Maria Church, and it's absolutely fascinating. He invited me into his workshop a couple of years ago to show me the work he'd done. It's quite amazing. He's totally deaf, so if you come across him in the village, you will happily shout at him, but his heart is in the village, and he lives there in the summer months with his wife, Angelines.
Go forward one, hopefully.
And these are the celebrations. Now, the two figures at the top, the lady in the yellow dress is Rowena MacDonald and her husband, Bob. And they were hospitaleros along with Sue, our presenter and member of our committee. And they were the three hospitaleros on duty. But Bob and Rowena were so busy making preparations, cooking the most wonderful food for the celebration in the Huerta. And just to Rowena's right in the top photo is Alberto Moran, that we've mentioned quite a bit, the priest that was so important in the setting up of Gaucelmo. So we got Dick Crean in the photograph top left with the white hat on the right hand side, chairman of the committee at that time. We've got Maxi.
The Creans organised a walk round the village. The Creans organised.
There you are, Paul.
Oh, we've gone back. Excellent. Right.
There you go.
Roger's in the middle of the photograph, top left, and he's the chairman of the Amigos del Bierzo. But Maxi, I was saying, is that he combines incredibly playing the drum as well as the flute. Bottom left, I love this photograph. That's me with the West Ham peaked cap, talking to Chonina, who Laurie met on her very first visit to the village. Chonina ran the bar in the village. And David Weston's photograph albums, middle bottom picture, is what the locals love to pore over and look at the most amazing pictures that David took when he was hospitalero and one of the first hospitaleros for Gaucelmo. And we've even got Alberto, the priest, once again helping out. He wasn't really, but he came along for the celebrations of the anniversary back in July 2016. And we've got the amazing dryer of clothes on the right-hand side. It gets most of the water out. You can always tell from that centrifugador, I think it's called, how dirty, how some pilgrims don't really rinse the clothes properly to get the water out. On this one.
The Creams organised a walk around the village the next morning, for those up early enough. Sunday Mass was celebrated by the new Bishop of Astorga, and the final part of the festivities was a meal in Gaspar. Notable visitors included Nelly and Etienne van Wolfsegem-Terling, Gaucelmo's first hospitalier. Notable visitors.
You wanted to say, Paul?
Yeah, I really wanted to say that for me, the highlight of the whole evening and the thing of the whole weekend, and what really brought the two communities, the villagers and the 40 members of the CSJ together, and what united them was this amazing film that was shot back in 1991 of the Working Party prior to the inauguration of Gaucelmo. And Father Javier opens the retreat house in the village next door to Gaucelmo, and the film was projected. There is no commentary. We haven't got a clue who shot the film, but the villagers had never seen it before, and most of the CSJ members hadn't either. And it was just wonderful, the reaction to it. I came across it in the CSJ offices in London, and it was just a VHS video labelled Gaucelmo and nothing else. No idea how historic it was. So it was a wonderful celebration.
Included Nelly.
I think we've got the last one.
And here we are with the presentation that year of the presentation which you've now just seen online. The telling of the story of the foundation of Refugio Gaucelmo.
So from left to right, we've got Paul Graham that we've talked about tonight, Vincent Cowley, Laurie standing up, Marion Marples and Alan Cutbush.
I didn't see all of that. I hope people were able to see it and that you enjoyed it. I love the old films myself, and I think Dave Weston's photos are extraordinary. So I hope you've enjoyed them despite the stumbles and problems. So it says on our running order to talk a bit about bringing things up to date, because I had the honour of reading Marion's words at the end of the presentation. Marion being a good woman, who was secretary for many, many years, and who was the first person to tell me about animal wool for blisters. So I will be eternally grateful to her and her memory for that. So bringing things up to date a bit then, because it's important that we remember, I think, the foundation and all of the work of those extraordinary people that gave us the place that we all love today. And as we said, Walter's vision in some ways has been fulfilled. Rabanal is a prosperous village. El Ganzo down the hill is a prosperous village with a cowboy bar. What more can you ask for? Fontibadon up the hill is thriving. As we know, the Camino has become more and more popular, more and more used. More Compostelas are being issued year on year. All of this, imagine it's 2019, because I'm aware that things have been somewhat different, but imagine 2019. It's difficult to know how many people come through Rabanal every year because there's no way of knowing. People do long holidays, short holidays, the whole walk from their front door. Rabanal sometimes has quiet days and sometimes has very busy days, and we wander round to each other, down to Pilar or round to Susanna's shop saying, "Have you seen anybody?" It's quiet, isn't it? Or, "Oh, didn't see you Saturday." Well, we were really busy, and there is little rhyme nor reason to explain all of that. But Gaucelmo continues. More pilgrims are using porterage services. More pilgrims are booking ahead using booking.com. I had a quick look today. The bigger places generally are still advertising. You can still book booking.com for Rabanal at the moment, but the actual booking a bed places as opposed to the booking room places aren't on at the moment. There have been more films and books about the Camino. We are all familiar with those. I was reading my Camino diary and I'd forgotten that I wrote the line, could I possibly have bumped into Martin Sheen in Burgos Cathedral? And obviously I did. And I would, because that would have been the year that they were looking for locations for the film. I once had the amazing experience of sitting in Antonio's bar with Antonio and Christina and co. In the middle of the afternoon, watching a cookery program on Spanish television, which featured Christina and Antonio in Antonio's bar. For indeed, there is a chef who runs between episodes and had watched them cook in their kitchen and had stood in our herb garden. So Gaucelmo's herb garden has featured on Spanish cooking television. It's also featured, of course, in the BBC series of the Celebrity Pilgrimage along the Camino. Sponsor a Week, which we mentioned earlier, as Marion mentioned, as Paul Graham's big idea. Sponsor a Week continues, and Paul Murray administered it for many years. I'm currently doing that. So thank you to all the people who continue to sponsor a week at Rabanal. Marion talked about the pressure of memorials. In fact, the pressure, there was one stained glass window that was moved from building room to room to room for several years as we all tried to work out what to do with it. And Dave Arthur subsequently built a beautiful frame for it and put it in the Huerta where the sun shines through it and it looks fabulous. And the Irish Pilgrim Group, the Multiple Sclerosis Society, came, but literally a coachload to unveil it, and it was a great day. The salon was remodeled. It depends when you last saw Gaucelmo, if you think of it as being 2 rooms down there or one big one knocked through. The big one knocked through has been a success, and that was as a result of a really kind bequest from an hospitalero. So, you know, the memorials have found their places, and we are truly grateful for the donations that enable us to keep moving forward. And in the last 2 years, I'm going to say, I'm sure other people have said this whatever way, I thank everybody. Johnny Walker used the facility on the Camino Pilgrim website to raise money for both us and our sister, Albergue, Mirath. And the committees of both of those are really grateful. Also grateful to Dave Arthur, our property coordinator, who fortunately lives in Spain and at various points as lockdowns have come and gone has been able to send us comforting emails saying things like, it's still there, it's fine, no water's got in, the garden's a mess. Thanks also to the monks for holding on to the keys for us and sending similar messages, and to our gardener Gozo, who has prevented us becoming a fire hazard during the last 2 summers by cutting down the long grass. So we look hopefully towards the future. During the lockdown, about a year ago, Paul Murray read a novel that was written in Spanish. And in this novel, written in Spanish, which was published, I think, last year, Paul translated a section for us. And I just want to read you a short section of that, because it was part of putting the logic of putting this evening together. I will read you a short section from chapter 34 of La Pata de Oca. And chapter 34 is called El Jardín de las Ciruelas. Rabanal del Camino was only 7 kilometers from Alganzo, and they were soon given accommodation at Refugio Gaucelmo, a welcoming rural Marigato house with an enormous garden which was bathed in sunlight. It was run by some English women who wore flowery dresses and had sweet foreign accents. The friends never did find out what some British ladies were doing, offering a cup of tea in a village on the way of St. James. Shall we play Julie's thoughts on being an hospitalero now, Freddie? Can we do that?
Absolutely. Yes, I shan't ask about the name Pooley. I'm sure it's it's more innocent than it sounds. Right, let me share this.
It's her grandchildren. Her grandchildren invented
grandchildren.
it
Yes.
for her.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
Bringing the story up to date. Some of the changes at Gaucelmo have been very, very subtle over 30 years. We are no longer called wardens, which always felt like a prison title. We now have a gentler, kinder label of hospitalero. Duties no longer last a month, but are now just over 2 weeks long. The biggest changes over the last 30 years has been in the role of hospitaleros. The role has become far more complex, with greater administrative demands made on the valuable time of hospitaleros. 30 years ago, the Gaucelmo handbook was only 4 pages long, and 1.5 of that was dedicated to the history of Gaucelmo. The last handbook, in 2019, was nearly 60 pages long. There are medical guidelines, bed bug processes, and daily and monthly Legionella testing, and even different coloured mops and buckets for different areas. I think I've got this right. It's red for the toilets, blue for the public areas, and green for the kitchen. In the last 2 years, one of the key changes relates to the registration of pilgrims. At registration, we're now required to record national identity or passport numbers, and this is downloaded every night to the Guardia Civil in Madrid. Gone are the days when the pilgrim register would remain on the desk at reception, and passing pilgrims would wander in, flick through the pages to find out if their Camino family had passed through. Now the register has to stay firmly locked away in the office. 30 years ago, Gaucelmo had no hot water anywhere in the building, not even in the hospitalary showers, because there weren't any. Pilgrims back then were grateful there were showers, even if they were glacial. There were no sheets on the bed in 1991 and no washing machines. Hospitaleros and pilgrims washed their clothes in a stone sink by the front door. Hospitaleros can now use 2 large washing machines and a tumble dryer because we now have beds with sheets and pillows on them, and the cases are changed every day, as are most of the sheets. But, which is a nice thing to say, some things have not changed at all. Gaucelmo still maintains the donativo ethic. The 4 rules laid down by the first hospitalero those 30 years ago: doors close at 10:30, silence hopefully by 11. Pilgrims leave by 8, no smoking and no large groups is the code we still abide by today. One of the additions introduced over the 30 years is the offering of tea and biscuits every day to pilgrims, either in the huerta if the weather's well, or by the wood-burning stove in the salon. It is a special and positive time bringing pilgrims of all nationalities together. In fact, Gaucelmo has become renowned by pilgrims for our tea ceremonies. Over the years, Gaucelmo's biggest asset has always been the hospitaleros. I'm glad to say today's hospitaleros remain as dedicated and as focused as their predecessors. Each hospitalero manages to find their own way to make pilgrims feel at home. It could be a posy on the pillow, making cakes for pilgrims at tea time, or offering cold water when they come in to register on a hot day. The pastoral care of tired and weary pilgrims at Gaucelmo remains in good hands. No doubt there will be challenges over the next 30 years, but provided we always remember as hospitalero and as a committee why we are there at Rabanal, is to listen, to look after, and have compassion for our fellow pilgrims. Gaucelmo will continue to strive and thrive even for the next 30 years.
Here we are. Very lovely.
Very lovely.
So,
So we've there. I've read part of that quote from the novel. I'm going to finish the quote from the novel, which picks up very much from Julie. So they never did find out where some British ladies were doing, offering a cup of tea in a village on the way of St. James. Anyway, the friends gratefully submitted themselves to their affectionate care. When you are on the Camino, a good welcome in the hostel fills you with a sense of home, that home that all pilgrims need. Come in, we will care for you here. At least for today, your problems have ceased. Thank you.
thank you very much. That concludes the slideshows for the evening. If anybody wanted to ask any questions, now is your moment, or make any comments. I have a few seconds to do so.
Dick's got his hand up.
Dick's got his hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself, Dick? You should have the power to do so now. Here we go.
Okay.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi, Dick. Hi, Liz.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Liz is here with me. Well, greetings from Spain. We managed to tune our phone into this, and we've absolutely loved it. I just want to thank everyone who's contributed. It was a magnificent compilation of memories and past, present, and the future. So really, my only message is to say, after I have to say most of a bottle of wine, the only thing I'd like to say is a great thanks to everyone, Paul and Julie and Peter, and
particularly Sue.
And particularly Sue, of course. Sue, you pulled it all together, and it's been brilliant. So thank you very much indeed from a slightly warmer part of the world.
Oh, you lucky things. Thank you.
Well, don't forget all the form filling. If anyone's thinking of coming on Camino, we've been sort of inspired towards the future of a Camino, but Spain is open. But getting back into the UK is not quite so straightforward at the moment. Hope to be back later this week. Anyway, thank you very much.
Well,
thanks, Freddie.
I'll just do one of the sweeps, see if I can see any other hands waving at me.
Okay.
I can.
David Garcia.
Lovely. All right. Well, yes, I'll just follow on from what Dick said. Obviously, thank you.
Paul had
Paul.
his hand up.
Where are you, Paul? Paul Murray. Oh, Paul Graham. Hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm Helena. Paul.
Oh, hello.
Thank you so much, everybody, for a marvelous presentation. Really fascinating, particularly for me to hear some of the early days, which I've never really heard about. Some of them quite backward and coming forward about things like that. But you may have asked this or covered this before we tuned in. We were a couple of minutes late, but I just wondered if there was any news about the health of James Maple, for instance, and how Mary Ivans is doing. I don't know whether anyone's seen them or heard anything of them. Sorry.
James Maple is in very good health. You may know that he had 3 months in hospital after a fall in which he broke a vertebra in his neck. But he returned from hospital to his flat in Herne Hill and is very well. And once we'd established where he was, I've been seeing quite a lot of him. He's able to go with a walking frame to the Sainsbury's in Herne Hill. And on Friday of this week, Lucy and I are taking him out to lunch at the Half Moon Tavern in Half Moon Lane, Herne Hill. I have checked the menu, it looks quite good. And he has a wonderful neighbor, a Frenchman named Axel. It was Axel who told me when when James went into hospital. Axel looks after him very well. And Axel and family took James for an even better meal the other day in Peckham. So I'm hoping that the Half Moon Tavern will be almost as good as the one in Peckham.
Splendid news.
And since this evening's program is to be recorded, I shall go and see James one of these days with my laptop and play it all to him.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
And Laurie, did you have an update on Mary Ivans?
Yes, I spoke to Mary at great length on the phone this morning, and then she rang later on today at about 6:30, I guess, and left a long message on my phone about her good wishes to be passed on this evening. She's in good form. She lives in Notting Hill Gate, as many of you know, and she's doesn't venture out or very far very often, but she's quite well. She's got a carer who comes in a few days a week for a few hours, and she's generally quite well. I speak to her probably twice a week, you know, she was full of reminiscences today and remembering so much about the original occasion and all the working parties and things like that. We had a good old chinwag this morning about it all. So
thank you, Laurie.
Can I just say one thing? I can't remember, Laurie, if you were at that meeting at Mary Remnant's when Walter first suggested the idea about doing something and then coming up with this idea.
Oh yeah, I was.
Yeah, exactly. And I just remember something that I said to Mary Ivans afterwards. I said, well, either Walter is completely mad and we should run away from him, or he's a saint. To which Mary said, well, one thing's sure, he's no saint. But, I think Mary's allowed to say that because she was married to him. But he was a lovely, lovely man. And it was, I don't think any of us at that meeting could ever have imagined what was being created. And we just, you know, we just had no idea. All we had was enthusiasm and love of the Camino, and that was it, really. I don't know if you want to add anything, Laurie.
That's enough.
Thanks.
Fabulous. All righty.
Can I just briefly say, because I have listed names because I'm looking after Sponsor a Week at the moment, and because I've worked with so many different people. Can I just say how lovely it is to see people here from the United States, from Canada, from Australia. I mean, you must be watching this at crazy times of the day. So it's so lovely to see you and to be able to put some faces, albeit they quite small on my screen, to some of the people I've been writing to about Sponsor Week this year. It's lovely to see all of you.
Can I just say from my humble situation as chair of the committee, but as I said in the beginning, my pedigree is nothing like most of the people here, and it's just been wonderful to watch this tonight and to see, I mean, how something can come from such vision and a lot of convivial dinners, I think is the word. Convivial dinners can achieve so much, but of course it all comes down to all you amazing people, you know, and all such individuals, personalities. So thank you, and for tonight, Sue, putting it all together, and particularly I have to say a word tonight for Paul, who's had a very difficult time recently. Paul did what I did a month or two before, which was to climb up a hill with his wife, which I did a month or so back, and my wife fell over and merely fractured her pelvis. But unfortunately, Paul's wife did something a lot more troublesome than that, and she's still in hospital waiting for an operation. So Paul's had an exhausting time recently. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Peter.
And we're all with you in spirit. Thank you.
Yeah, really inspirational and amazing to hear the story. For some of us it might be the first time, for others it's probably just a reminder, but wonderful to hear it in the words of the people that were there at the time, from the people who are sort of looking after it at the moment. It's been brilliantly organized. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you so much to the people who did readings and contributed. The biggest thanks does need to go to Sue, who has spent, I cannot tell you how many hours putting all of this together, coming to London, coming to the CSJ library, finding the readings, finding the photos, editing the photos, converting the files, generally battling with the technology up until the last minute that comes with this sort of
beyond
thing. So
the last
very
minute,
well done, Sue. Also beyond the last minute, the minute was gone. So really well done, fantastic job. Thank you so much for doing that for all of us. We really do appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this evening very much. I certainly did. And yeah, many thanks for coming. I don't know if Sue or Peter, you had any final words, but otherwise,
no, just to keep saying thank you and lovely to see everyone from me.
I've had my final words. Thank you.
The final words, the final say. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Hope to see you all again later this week, and hopefully in the flesh sometime soon. Buen Camino. Stay safe. Bye. Everyone.